Have you ever found yourself in a relationship, maybe romantic, or even just a really deep friendship, where you feel like you are doing absolutely everything right, yet there's still this lingering sense of distance?
Oh, definitely. Like there's an invisible ceiling there.
Exactly. An invisible ceiling on how deeply you can actually connect with this person.
Hmm.
No matter how much time you spend together, you're communicating, you're showing up, but there's a pane of glass between you.
It is an incredibly common experience.
Mm.
And usually it leaves people feeling deeply frustrated because, I mean, you get the sense that you are following all the standard rules of intimacy.
You're checking the boxes.
Yeah, but the intimacy itself feels oddly hollow, or at least, like you said, capped at a certain level.
And that exact feeling is what brings us to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a truly, just a profound piece of writing today titled To Be Loved Beyond My Ego Defenses.
It really is a fascinating text.
It is. And our mission today is to figure out what these ego defenses actually are, how they quietly sabotage our deepest connections, and most importantly, the specific roadmap this source provides for moving past them. Because the text argues that this invisible ceiling, we built it ourselves.
We did. And, to understand how we built it, we really need to clarify a crucial definition right up front because it frames everything we're about to discuss.
Okay, let's lay the groundwork.
So when this text talks about the ego, it is not talking about arrogance. It's not talking about pride or vanity or someone just walking around with a big head.
Right, not an ego trip.
Exactly. In this specific context, the ego is strictly defined as a system of protection. It is a psychological structure built entirely from your past experiences of pain, rejection, misunderstanding, or instability.
So it's basically a shield.
Yes, its singular biological and psychological mandate is to prevent you from experiencing that harm ever again.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Because the way I'm picturing it, it's less like wearing a literal heavy suit of armor and more like having your smartphone permanently stuck on Do Not Disturb mode.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Like you set it up that way originally because you were getting overwhelmed with spam calls or stressful notifications.
Okay.
But a totally rational choice to protect your peace.
100% rational.
But years later, the setting is still on. It absolutely does its job. It keeps the noise out. But it also automatically silences the calls you actually want to receive from your closest friends. So you're protected from the spam, but you're also completely isolated.
Yeah, that do not disturb metaphor captures the mechanism perfectly, especially because of how quietly it operates in the background. I mean, we rarely realize it's even turned on.
Right, we forget it's there.
The text points out that these ego defenses are incredibly sneaky. They almost never look like literal defense mechanisms. Most of the time, they are just thoroughly disguised as our core personality traits.
That is so true. You don't introduce yourself at a party by saying, hi, I'm Sarah, and behold my trauma responses.
No, of course not. You just think, I'm a highly independent person or I'm just naturally analytical.
Yeah, you own it as your identity.
Yeah.
So before we can talk about taking the armor off or toggling off that setting, we have to understand what it looks like.
Well, the source material breaks down the specific manifestations of these defenses to show just how common they are. They appear as distance, control, perfectionism, avoidance, intellectualization, emotional shutdown, and even what the text calls exaggerated independence.
Exaggerated independence. That's an interesting phrase.
It is. And the fascinating part is that while a perfectionist and an emotionally shut down person look completely different on the surface, their underlying strategy is identical.
Wait, really? How so?
They are both silently broadcasting the exact same message to the world, which is, if I stay like this, if I maintain this specific posture, I won't be hurt again.
Wow. Okay, I actually want to pause and push back on one of those, or at least examine it a bit more, because exaggerated independence really jumped out at me when reading this.
It's a tough one for a lot of people to accept as a defense.
Right. Because society constantly praises extreme independence. We celebrate the person who says, I don't need anyone, or the entrepreneur who does it all themselves. I mean, it is practically a baseline virtue in modern culture.
It absolutely is.
And honestly, isn't relying on people genuinely dangerous? People do let you down. Friends flake, partners leave. Keeping a strong sense of independence seems incredibly rational to me, not just defensive.
Well, you're not wrong. It is entirely rational from a survival standpoint, and that friction is exactly why it's such an effective defense mechanism. It is socially sanctioned.
Socially sanctioned. That makes so much sense.
Right, because if you build a wall of anger, people tell you to go to therapy. But if you build a wall of extreme self-reliance, people give you a promotion.
Wow. That is painfully accurate.
But the text asks us to look at the function of that independence in our personal lives. If a person refuses to rely on anyone else, they are guaranteeing they can never be let down. If you never lean on someone, they can never drop you.
But if I could do it myself, why risk the drop at all? It still feels like a smart play, you know?
It's a smart play for survival, sure, but it's a terrible play for connection. The text highlights this fundamental, tragic irony. The exact same defenses that successfully protect you are what inherently limit the depth of love you can actually receive.
Because you're keeping everyone at arm's length.
Exactly. Love, in its deepest and most transformative form, does not interact with the defense. It requires moving toward what is behind the defense. If you only ever present the persona of the person who never needs help, the other person is only ever loving a capability. They are loving a firewall.
You love my firewall, but you don't know me. Gosh, that feels incredibly lonely.
It is very lonely.
Even if they admire how strong your firewall is, you're sitting behind it thinking, but you have no idea who I am when I'm tired or scared or just overwhelmed.
Precisely. You feel unseen.
Which brings us to the real challenge. If you're listening to this right now and recognizing your own do not disturb settings, whether that's perfectionism, hyperindependence, or intellectualizing all your feelings into data points, how do you actually start bypassing them?
Well, the source material is very practical on this front. It doesn't just diagnose the problem, it lays out 3 distinct conditions that must be met to actually experience being loved beyond these ego defenses.
Okay, let's go through them. What's the first one?
The first condition revolves around a concept it calls recognition without identification.
Recognition without identification. Okay, so does that mean catching myself in the act, like noticing I'm being super cynical in a conversation and realizing I'm just doing it to avoid looking naive, rather than shrugging and telling myself, well, I'm just a cynical person?
That is the exact shift the text is calling for. It requires separating your identity from the mechanism. It's the transition from saying, I am cold, to I am actively protecting myself.
Wow, from I am cold to I am protecting myself.
Exactly. From I am naturally detached to I am maintaining safety. If you identify completely with the defense, if you think your distance is just your immutable personality, it remains an invisible filter over all your connections. You will never see it as a choice you can unmake.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It gives you agency. But, I mean, awareness alone doesn't actually dismantle the wall, right?
Oh, yeah, it doesn't.
Because if I know I'm intellectualizing my feelings, how do I practically signal to my partner or friend that I'm ready to drop the act?
That is where the second condition comes in. The text describes it as a willingness to not fully control perception. Ego defenses are fundamentally exercises in PR management.
PR management, yes.
They are attempts to control exactly how you are seen and how others behave toward you. If you are a perfectionist, you are managing perception by ensuring no one sees a flaw they could use against you.
And the text says we have to let go of that PR management. It calls it selective openness. When I was reading this section, the analogy that immediately came to my mind was live editing our words.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Because the text specifically highlights things, like saying something true before you refine it, or allowing someone to see confusion instead of clarity. To me, that is exactly like letting someone read your messy, typo-ridden first draft, instead of a polished, PR-approved final manuscript.
The first draft concept is a fantastic way to visualize this, because ego defenses demand the final manuscript.
But handing over the first draft is terrifying. We are so conditioned to only present the finished product. We want to seem put together, rational, and totally in control of our emotions.
It's very counterintuitive to share the mess.
Right. If my partner asks why I'm upset, my instinct is to go into another room, figure out a perfectly logical thesis statement for my feelings, and then come back and present it.
The final manuscript.
Exactly. But if you only ever hand over that final manuscript, you're just handing over a performance. You aren't letting them see the human being wrestling with the ideas, letting someone see your confusion, letting them see you stumble over a feeling before you've perfectly categorized it. It creates an opening.
It creates a crack in the facade where real connection can finally get in. But bringing someone into that messy first draft brings us directly to the third condition, which is entirely about the role of the other person.
Right, because dropping your defense is only half the equation.
Exactly.
Because if I hand you my typo-ridden first draft and you immediately pull out a red pen and start grading my grammar, I am never showing you a draft again.
That is a very apt comparison. Condition 3 is encountering someone who does not engage only with the surface defense. Most people interact at the level of visible behavior.
Meaning they just react to what's right in front of them.
Yes, so if you present a defense, say, you feel vulnerable, so you get sarcastic and distant, most people will naturally react to the sarcasm. They will get annoyed and pull away.
Which just proves to your ego that the defense was completely necessary. Like, see, they left. Good thing I didn't show them my actual feelings. It becomes this terrible self-fulfilling prophecy.
To break that cycle and be loved beyond the defense, the text states the receiving person must do 3 specific things. First, they must not react solely to your surface presentation.
Okay, no reacting to the sarcasm.
Right. Second, they must not withdraw when your defense flares up. And third, they must not try to fix or dominate the defense. They have to remain oriented to what is behind it.
Let me see if I can ground that with an example.
Mm-hmm.
So if I get scared about the future of a relationship and I throw up my wall of extreme intellectualization, like I start analyzing our compatibility like it's a sterile science experiment, instead of just admitting I'm afraid of losing the person.
A very common response, yes.
My partner can't attack the intellectualization. They can't yell, stop analyzing everything like a robot. They have to speak to the scared person operating the robot.
Yes. They have to hear the fear underneath the data points. The text describes the internal experience this creates beautifully. It says you feel seen without having performed. You feel met without having to stabilize everything first. You feel allowed to exist without adjustment.
Allowed to exist without adjustment. I mean, if you're listening right now, think about how rare that feeling actually is, to just exist.
It's incredibly rare.
So let's play this out. Let's say you do all the work. You recognize your do not disturb mode. You start sharing your messy first drafts. You find a partner or a friend who actually knows how to read them without pulling out the red pen. You experience this deep, unadjusted connection. The firewall is permanently dismantled, right? You just walk into the sunset completely vulnerable forever.
Well, the text introduces a reality check here that completely shatters that fairy tale expectation.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it asserts a very grounded truth. Ego defenses do not disappear simply because someone loves you well.
Wait, really? Even if the other person does everything perfectly, even
Yeah.
if they never pull out the red pen, that feels almost unfair.
It feels unfair until you understand the biology behind it. The text points out that these defenses aren't just mental decisions. They are wired into our nervous systems.
Ah, so it's physical.
Yes. You will still react. You will still occasionally close off. You will still revert to old patterns, especially under stress. Being loved beyond your defenses doesn't mean you instantly stop having them. It just means they are no longer the only way you relate to this person.
This maps perfectly onto how the physical body processes past trauma. Think of a flinch reflex.
Exactly.
If you have a history of being struck and someone suddenly raises a hand near your face, your hands are going to naturally come up to block. Even if it's your loving partner who is just reaching out to stroke your hair, you are going to flinch. Your conscious, logical brain knows this person loves you and would never hurt you, but your nervous system is operating on a lag. It's reacting to the past, not the present.
The flinch reflex is the exact physical equivalent of what the text is describing psychologically.
Yeah.
The body literally has to learn that not every connection leads to harm.
It takes time.
A lot of time. The nervous system gradually reduces its need for constant guarding, but it requires repetition. It's a process of neuroadaptation.
So it's not a light switch you just flip off. It's an unlearning process.
The text frames it as a gradual softening of identity. Your identity slowly loosens its attachment to protection as its primary function. That softening happens through repeated experiences of safety that do not require the armor. Love slowly transforms from something you have to actively negotiate through structure, managing the PR, keeping the distance, into something you can receive directly.
If you're out there getting frustrated with a partner who still puts walls up sometimes after years of a generally great relationship, this is such a vital concept to grasp. It's not necessarily a failure of your love, it's a lag in their nervous system.
That's a very empathetic way to look at it.
It takes the pressure off both people. You don't have to be perfectly vulnerable 100% of the time. You just have to allow for that gradual softening.
Yeah.
But we have to talk about the final barrier the text mentions, because it suggests that sometimes the softening never happens.
Yes. The text dives into the deepest and perhaps most difficult layer of this puzzle. We've discussed what happens when we drop the shield and how the other person needs to react. But what happens when the other person does everything perfectly? They stay present, They see behind your mechanisms, and you still can't accept the connection.
The self-sabotage phase.
The text reveals that the greatest barrier to this profound intimacy is often not that others cannot love beyond your defenses. It is that you do not allow that love to register.
What does that actually look like in practice? Because it sounds crazy on paper. We spend our whole lives craving to be seen and loved for who we really are. Why would we reject it when it finally arrives?
We reject it by finding ways to neutralize it. The text lists the specific ways we block it. We distrust it, we minimize it, we reinterpret it as something else entirely, or we actively push it away once it gets too close.
Like pushing them away.
Right. Think about someone picking a massive fight out of nowhere right when a relationship feels the most peaceful and secure.
Oh yeah, like things are too quiet, let me create some chaos so I know where I stand. But why? What is the root cause of that sabotage?
Because accepting this unfiltered love requires letting go of a deeply rooted belief that your defenses are necessary for your literal survival.
Wow.
If you fully accept that you can be loved without your firewall, you have to admit that maybe the firewall isn't necessary anymore. And for a nervous system that has relied on that firewall for decades, turning it off feels existentially threatening.
The psychological whiplash of this is staggering. Think about taking off a heavy 80-pound backpack that you've worn your entire life. Logically, taking off should feel amazing, but when you finally drop it, your immediate physical sensation isn't relief. It's panic.
Yes, panic.
You feel completely off balance. You think, oh no, I lost my bag, I'm vulnerable, I'm missing something. So your instinct is to scramble and put the heavy burden right back on your shoulders just to feel normal again.
That panic is the exact mechanism of self-sabotage. The text points out that we immediately try to reinterpret the love. We think, they don't really love me. They just want something from me. Or, they only love me because they don't know how messy I truly am yet.
We just make up excuses.
We invent narratives to justify putting the heavy backpack back on so we can feel safe again.
We'd rather feel burdened than exposed.
Which is why the text concludes that this entire process is strictly two-sided. Yes, others must meet you there, in the space beyond your defense, but you must actively allow yourself to be met.
That's the hardest part.
It really is. You have to tolerate the profound discomfort of feeling off balance long enough to realize that you aren't actually in danger. You have to let the nervous system calibrate to the new reality. Only when both occur does the experience finally stabilize.
You have to allow yourself to be met. You have to endure the flinch, feel the urge to push them away, and consciously choose to let the love register anyway. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's synthesize this journey for everyone listening.
Good idea.
We all build psychological firewalls, this ego protection out of past pain. And we spend years mistaking those settings, like our perfectionism or our extreme independence, for our actual personalities.
We confuse our survival strategies with our identity.
Right. And to experience truly profound connection, we have to recognize those mechanisms for what they are. We have to selectively drop our PR management. We have to start sharing the messy, unedited first drafts of ourselves.
And find people who can handle that.
Exactly. Find people who will read those drafts without pulling out a red pen to critique our defenses. And crucially, when we do find that safety, we have to endure the biological lag. We must allow our nervous systems time to realize we aren't under attack, and let the love actually register without sabotaging it just because the vulnerability feels unfamiliar.
That is the complete roadmap, and the source text offers a beautiful, piercing distillation of this entire concept.
What does it say?
In its clearest form, it says that to be loved beyond your ego defenses means this. You are not loved for how well you protect yourself. You are not loved for how well you perform stability. You are not loved for how well you manage perception. You are loved in the exact place where you no longer know how to protect yourself.
The exact place where you no longer know how to protect yourself. That is incredibly powerful. It shifts the entire goal of a relationship. It moves it from being safe to being known.
And the text finishes with a promise about what happens when you finally allow yourself to be known in that unprotected space. It says, and instead of harm, something remains. That is what redefines everything.
Which leaves us with a final thought I want to offer you, the listener, to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. We started by talking about that heavy backpack or that do not disturb setting we've kept switched on for years. Our entire identity, the way we structure our days, and the boundaries we set have all been shaped by the anticipation of a threat.
bracing for impact.
Right. But if you manage to toggle that setting off, if you step out from behind the firewall and stand in that quiet, vulnerable space where the harm you were expecting never arrives and only that mysterious something remains, who do you actually become? What does your life look like? What does your heart look like when sheer survival is no longer the primary goal of your relationships? Until next time, take care of yourselves and maybe try sending out a few of those messy first drafts.